Hi guys, welcome back to Casting Commons, the show where we talk and discuss all things Pauper. I am your host, Teasdale, and this is my co-host, Monastery Rip Spear himself, Reese.
Hello.
I couldn't think, I'm sorry, it was dreadful. I ran out of options. So pal, what have you been up to this week in Magic? Because it has been an absolute banger of a week, to be fair.
Yeah. To be honest, mostly I've just been like consolidating like paper cards, really. I've been working on pulling together a bunch of pauper decks basically to create a bit of a gauntlet. So with stuff still in the post, I guess we've currently got White Weenie, Mono Blue Terror, Mono Red, Mono Green Stompy, Bogles, Elves, Grixis Affinity, and Ultratron all built. Along with obviously you've got Gardens as well.
Yeah.
And I imagine I'll probably build mono black as well, just so we've got one of each mono-coloured deck.
Well, that's interesting you say that as well, to be fair. It's a good lead.
Yeah. And then apart from that, I've sort of just been trying to figure out what to play for the Recollect event this weekend. But that might change given the recent ban announcement that we are going to talk about.
It won't, but, you know, some merit, I guess.
What about yourself?
Not a lot, really. Apart from basically similar to yourself, but more Magic Online. I've been consolidating Magic Online decks and just built a bunch of Ixalan decks. I built up Mono Black Devotion, which I'm not sure on the list yet, like exactly how it's gonna be the finalized option, but it's kind of similar to like a take on Medvedev's did before Ixalan came out, with like a up to date draw engine with Deadly Dispute. But you've obviously got the Mephitic Draft, and you've got Tithe and Blade, and you've got so you can kind of go. So there's that way with like Come By Switches, and obviously Gary as or Grey Merchant of Asphodel as the top end. I built up the up to date Gardens list with the Frantic Offering and all that sort of stuff. Built up the Black White Blade deck that's been knocking around as well. Just need to find time to record with all these. Is basically where I'm at.
A lot of decks with new cards.
Yeah, a lot of decks with new cards.
Oh, if you play Squadron Hawk in it, we can call it Coreblade again.
Oh, snap!
And Coreblade can return.
Oh! Just put Gates in as well, just for crap.
Yeah.
There you go. Win-win.
I mean, you may as well.
Yeah, might as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it. And then I wrote obviously about the bannings that happened yesterday. So hopefully that should be up tomorrow, I think. Pretty much it. Exciting stuff. But we are not the interesting this week. We have someone else who's much more interesting, or who was very interesting in the format and now is no more. But we'll move on to a bit of news, I guess, before we discuss that. So before we've kind of touched on this already, this weekend there is a Recollect event, Pauper event in Chester at Recollect. I will try that again. Which is a £250 prize pool Pauper event. Recollect's obviously been a big supporter for us up in the Northwest for quite a while, so all we can do is give them some love, and hopefully you guys look at attending. Obviously, if it's nearby and if you're considering going, I'd definitely recommend it. They're great guys, great store by the looks of it. Obviously, I haven't been personally. It's pretty new, but it's going to be a good event by the looks of it. And yourself is obviously going, as you mentioned. Just need to finally do some testing.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get time to test. Like, I might just wing it. It'll be whatever side games I can play this evening, basically. And if I get a chance to get on Modo, like maybe tomorrow or Thursday.
But yeah,
minimal testing.
A bit right. Format hasn't changed that much, to be fair. It's not like there's just been a banner or anything. But yeah, guys, the event will be in the description below of this podcast. So please check it out if you are thinking about going. And obviously, we'll always recommend pre-purchasing a ticket, because I think there's only 32 places, like as in cap event, for the size of the
and I think at least 50% of them have gone now. So
so there you go. I would advise looking at it before you obviously go. But it'll be a good event anyways. Shame I can't make it, but you will represent anyways. Don't leave the t-shirt at home.
No, I need to remember to bring that.
So I think that's it for news. I don't really think anything else happened, really. But no, in all seriousness, there was a ban restriction announcement. Before we get into the actual ban restriction announcement, I do want to say I have noticed every time there's a B&R, Emma Partlow, the UK representative for the PFP, makes a big stance on showing that they are separate, that they're not on the daily MTG updates with all the other formats, and she does that every single time that there's a ban and restriction announcement that's not Pauper related. Someone comments saying, what about Pauper? And then she'll instantly comment saying, they are separate. And the thing that's really annoyed me is she's done a lot of God's work in telling people it's separate, and then they'll go and just put it on the thing anyways. Like, all that effort just gone to waste. So now every time we see this, it's just going to be like, where's Pauper?
Yeah. Yeah, I think to be fair, obviously it's sort of just lined up that they come on the same day, which you may as well put them together. But for the most part, obviously being separate is a big benefit because the PFP can essentially just do banned and restricted whenever they want. They don't need to line up with WotC. But yeah, it will now basically every time WotC do a B&R, there'll be even more people asking where Pauper is.
Exactly. Shot themselves in the foot. But
well, yeah, I don't know. I like that it was there, but I think it just means you're probably gonna have to double down next time, telling people it's separate.
Yeah, but that was it. That was my big bugbear of the whole announcement. But other than that, it was a fantastically for Pauper perspective, it was a fantastically well done announcement. We got not only an article separate to the actual B&R announcement, we got the B&R announcement, and we got a video on Good Morning Magic like we have been for those updates.
Yeah.
And I actually think that update as well, they knocked it out the park. Like how much data they give us was pretty incredible.
Yeah, especially compared to other formats. Like it's just basically unparalleled. You wouldn't be getting that much information from like a modern ban or a legacy ban.
No.
So it's really good.
But yeah, without further ado, I guess, for those that did not know and have somehow not seen this but are interested in Pauper enough to listen to us, I guess, Monastery Swifty is banned. Finally, I guess, for some people, or why have they done this to others, I guess.
I think the people who are saying why have they done this is very, very limited.
Yeah. But yeah, the announcement was great. They talked about all sorts of different things, which we will touch on. They went through it. I think was it like basically like deck by deck, almost.
Yeah. So what I've done for the notes, essentially, we're gonna say now what our initial thoughts on the banning is and what we would have done. And then I've essentially broken down the video into a few key points. Yeah. So we'll just essentially say what the point is and if we think anything about that, basically.
Mm-hmm. So I guess mine's not really too like deep on the thought on the matter, to be fair. I have also put this in a video on my channel that what I actually would have done. And basically I think personally more action probably would needed to be taken. But I think probably something else is probably going to need to be taken out of red. And I probably would have hit more decks as well. But with that being said, this banning shows to me one thing that pretty, I'm hoping very key, is that they're very much, they'd rather like pick a card that's a problem or the obvious problem, ban it and then monitor it, and then ban it, ban the next one, then monitor it, then ban the next one. So I think we will end up getting to the same end goal as, not necessarily me, what I'm saying or what needs banned, but we will get the same end goal that everyone wants or whatever, you know, these problematic cards or this deck's a problem. We will get to that same end goal. It will probably take longer because they've obviously got a lot more monitor to do. But I also personally think it shows either how much they care or how meticulous the PFP are being, that they don't want to get it wrong. but it also shows that, like, to me as well, that they're not not necessarily in a bad way, but they're not game developers. They can't, like, it's, like, for example, like
Well,
Hearthstone people. Do you know what I mean?
most of them aren't.
Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, to that extent that they're not like, they're all not experienced enough to be like, right, okay, we need to ban this, and this is exactly what will happen to the format. We know 110%. We'd rather just cherry pick and then monitor, and cherry pick then monitor, and then you kind of ease out into the exact same end goal. It'll just take that little bit longer, which I think's fine.
Yeah, I think it's the safer way to do it, really, isn't it?
For sure.
Which is not a bad thing.
Exactly. And that's basically my thoughts.
Yeah, so for me, initial thoughts on the ban were basically, it's a good ban. It's something that probably should have been done long before this. Like, I think Swifty has obviously been way above rate for essentially since it was downshifted to common. And there's been lots of spikes of Mono Red's done really well, and then it just sort of died back down, which I think probably prevented it banning each of these times. And then it seems this time they just got sick of it and everyone asking for it, so they're just like, yeah, well, okay, we'll finally do it. I think for what I would have done, would have probably been pretty similar for this time. I would have banned Swift Spear. I think not hitting anything else from red for now is fine. Like, essentially, like, having mono red as one of the top decks of the format is not really a bad place to be if it's in line with what the power level of the format wants to be. Like, Swift Spear just made like double Swift Spear draws into like spells way too broken and end the game way too fast. But I think without that, it'll be a lot more in line. It might still be too good. Something else might have to go in the future. But I think it is worth just seeing what it's like just with Swift Spear gone. For me, the second thing I would have done is just unban Prophetic Prism. Basically, it just shouldn't have ever really been banned. It's sort of a relevant card on the ban list. And with formats with ban lists, you essentially just want them to be as small as possible. And then completely in contradictory to a small ban list, I guess, my last thing would have just been to blanket ban all the black bordered cards. I think they shouldn't have been black bordered in the first place. We've basically had Marrow confirm that, yeah, we probably shouldn't have done that. The Sticker Goblin in particular provides like a massive divide between Magic Online and paper, as well as there's a bunch of other cards that are legal in paper as cards, but not not on Magic Online because they don't work or they just haven't tried to put them on there. So it just like splits the format for no reason and for essentially no benefit.
Yeah, that's fair. Can't really comment on the other cards.
They would have been my changes.
Yeah, I think the only one is, I guess, obviously they did touch on not why they didn't unban Prophetic Prism, and I do get it to an extent, especially touching on the one ban at a time kind of thing, or the one change at a time.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it won't warp the format like Prophetic Prism, but
I think it probably just won't make a difference. But we'll get to that. We've got a point in the video where they discuss that.
Yeah. But yeah, as I said, fair comment. It's interesting to see that all the information that they give. So without further ado, I guess we'll dive right into what the video said, I guess.
Yeah. So I basically split it into sections. So from the intro section, one of the main comments was that they are watching and taking data from challenges and other big events, and are happy with the diversity, particularly in challenges, which is something we've been saying for quite a while. Is the actual diversity at the top is pretty good. And then the other two things that I've highlighted is they basically picked up on the main issue that Pop was having is with speed, like how fast decks have gotten to be able to kill people. Essentially with the print of Tolarian Terror and the downshift of Swift Spear and all the glitters. Yeah, and I think to be fair, that's like a pretty reasonable take to have. I think it's
Yeah,
a pretty
definitely.
clear influence on the format.
Yeah, it isn't. As you say, like all these downshifts and printings of cards that probably should never been common is definitely a showcase of what obviously the power level of the game in general. Like obviously we're getting more commons at this sort of power level,
Mm.
and it's unavoidable at this point now. I think by the way obviously Wizards are making sets, and it's just speeding up the format incredibly. Like these are all in the past 18 months, 2 years
Yeah,
maybe, and they've just instantly just increased the speed of the format.
yeah, and yeah, I sort of agree with that from some perspective. I think if Wizards actually considered Pauper as a format to design for,
Mm.
like a lot of these would be avoidable because they're just stupid downshifts.
Yeah,
Like all the glitters isn't really adding anything to that limited format by being a common,
yeah,
and really same with Swift Spear. Like
yeah.
they're not adding anything good to that limited format.
Mm.
Um, Terra obviously is just it's a creature like this has got pretty nurse common. It's not really a they maybe could have evaluated better and had it as an uncommon, but
Mm.
like I said, I don't think they really consider Pauper as a as
No,
existing.
no, they don't. And I think that's probably one of the biggest battles. As obviously when we had Weber on, he said that's what he would like the most. Is
Yeah.
obviously to have some sort of impact. He's like obviously not saying he wants to design cards, but he wants to obviously have influence of what is common, what's not common, because that would really help the format because
Mm.
it's not necessarily a lack of good cards coming in the format. It's a lack of good cards in the right places, not coming in the
Yeah.
format. Like obviously you mentioned, obviously like mono green hasn't had anything new, etc. So, but yeah, it'd be one of the things we just got to bear in mind.
Yeah.
Obviously,
For
suffer
now, and
and suffer with
unless
it.
they ever start considering us. um. So then the next section was basically all about mono red. Um. The main points I've really pulled from it is they considered banning the two Reckless Impulse cards, Reckless Impulse and Rend Resolve. Obviously you've talked about that quite a bit in your video that you
Mm.
posted about what you think should be banned.
Mhm.
Um, they ultimately decided not to ban those because they thought that, well, if we get rid of Swifty, it does decrease the power level on those cards.
Mhm.
Which I think is a fair
Yeah,
assumption.
yeah. I think
Um,
basically on which also the big thing from this video that I found that they call it bottle two. I don't know if you've seen that. They called them the
yeah,
bottle two
from
effect.
Elkin Bottle.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
love that name. I'm all for it. But anyways, um, one thing that I did think is my personal opinion is if I was to choose the cards to ban from mono red would probably have been the two impulse effects.
Mm.
But I ultimately don't think they would have gotten through that ban process without receiving so much negativity for leaving Swift Spearing. So I think
Yeah.
so then I think that the point that they have to ban Swift Spear, then you're kind of committed to like you don't want to ban three cards. You know what I mean? You don't want to ban Swifty and both draw twos. So like I think it's one of them things where those cards are the probably cards I would have chosen because
Mm.
they're the least replaceable. But I don't think you can get through the ban list without banning Swift Spear because all hell break loose for pauper players.
Yeah.
I think is
Yeah.
my thing.
I think that's fair. Obviously, they don't really go in any other decks either.
No.
So it would essentially just make all the red decks a lot more fragile and
Yeah.
a lot more all in like bushwhacker decks.
Yeah.
Um, and they wouldn't have the sort of stick and power and like ability to compete with control that they
Yeah.
do.
Exactly.
But my thought with that is that's sort of a card that will just get printed again with a different name
Yeah.
and
Obviously.
at the same rarity. So like you ban two and then like two sets down the line was just print another.
Yeah. That is obviously an issue, but
Yeah.
you would like to think at that point. But then we're going back to the point of obviously not having impact in future sets.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd like to carry on.
Yeah, the second point was that they considered banning Kuldotha, Rebirth, or Bushwhacker.
Hmm.
Um, but essentially that those two cards are a lot older than everything else and have been fine for a very long time in the form. Well, essentially, since they've been printed, they've been fine in the format and have just been either role players or played in Zoo or They've never been really a point of contention.
Yeah, the only thing I have about this is like that's fine that they've obviously been around for a while, but obviously cards around it change. Like mono
Yeah.
red or mono colored decks for a long time in Pauper never had like strong enough reasons to be mono colored. Like if that makes sense. Like you get if you were playing monocolored decks or back when, like actually playing monocolored decks, your benefit was I had untapped lands, but you played weaker cards because
Yeah,
and
I
now
think
that's
on
not the
the sort
case.
of mono red part of that as well. Obviously, for a long time, it was just burn.
Yeah.
Like there was no sort of reason to play Kuldotha because you had to play artifacts, and none of the
Yeah.
artifacts sort of worked
Yeah.
with what you were doing. But since like Synth and Voldar and Epicure,
Mm,
um, there's sort of just a big reason to play cards like Kuldotha, and then
mm,
as soon as you put Kuldotha in your deck, Bushwhacker sort of makes sense as well.
yeah. And that's the only thing that I didn't like about this take because I personally think I was all for banning two cards out of mono red, and I was kind of
Mm,
on the same thing of if you're banning Swift Spear, you probably ban one of those two, like the Kuldotha or the
mm.
Bushwhacker. Um, and I'm just not I'm not a fan of the take of, oh well, they were fine previously, they've been here for 5 years, yeah, but everything else around it's changed. Like the whole
Yeah.
context of how good these cards are has changed completely. But
Yeah, I sort of get it from both angles. I like sort of keeping the um history of Pauper. Like I like keeping as many old cards as possible and
yeah,
banning sort of new downshifts and stuff that aren't
yeah,
really um what's the word, like a part like a main focus of the format.
mm,
Um and to be fair, like Bushwhacker is not always in Kuldotha. Like there's a
no,
lot of Kuldotha decks that have done well and just don't play it.
yeah, that's true.
Um But yeah, Cold Author would have been. It would have probably been a more damaging ban than Swift Spear. I think you would have to change the deck a lot more. Like Swift Spear is probably still a better card, and the decks that evolved from a Cold Author but not Swift Spear ban would probably still be as good, but it would change the deck more in its current form. I think banning
Yeah,
Cold Author. Um, but yeah, so the conclusion to that sort of mono red section was that Swift Spear is essentially considered the main focus and the main cause for the massive mono red in Portland.
yeah. Which obviously every red deck all have in common that Swift Spear is the card in
Yeah,
common. Pinger, Kiln Fiend, Kuldotha, one drops. They're all got Swift Spear,
yeah.
so it makes sense.
Moving on from that, they spoke about affinity. Sort of widely spoke about affinity. It's all that glitters and affinity.
Yeah,
They considered all that glitters ban, but essentially landed on the point that it's a lot easier to disrupt than most of the other cards that people have been considering. Which seems like a reasonable take.
yeah. Makes sense to be fair. As all that glitters is pretty interactable.
Yeah. They also considered an artifact land ban, either bridges or the OG artifact lands. Ultimately, this would have a huge impact on Pauper as a whole. Obviously, the OG artifact lands have literally been around forever. And the bridges, although have been a problem before and have been up there in consideration for bans before, are in so many decks that it would have like a pretty huge impact on the format.
Yeah, I think also the main thing from this to me is that affinity or the artifact deck, like as in glitters, doesn't really run bridges. It runs like the blue white one. Like, I guess the
Mm.
Jeskai one obviously runs the red one as well, like the red white one. But ultimately, it's not like a be all and end all like Grixis affinity is. It is.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously, yeah. The main blue white glitters doesn't run it, but we've seen Esper glitters, we've seen Jeskai glitters do well, and obviously Grixis Affinity runs a pile of bridges now. But obviously, like all the wildfire decks and stuff like that run bridges as well.
Yeah, I do also, as much as I do hate Jeskai Wildfire, I do love the argument to try and keep the bridges in as much as possible for
Yeah,
Wildfire.
yeah,
Like at the point that it will always be a meme that like the first time they did this, like Jeskai Wildfire fell off, Jund Wildfire didn't exist, and it was like their reasoning is Wildfire decks, and it's like, but now they've sort of made a return to some extent.
Yeah.
It's like sort of valid.
And then this sort of section ended on they ultimately decided that if they can nerf red a reasonable amount, the sideboard slots devoted to your Hydroblast, your Blue Elemental Blast, etc., would be freed up a bit more to use against Affinity. Which again makes sense. The Uldotha being as strong as it is, and like basically every blue deck playing 8 blasts in the sideboard, it did really push it in a way where you had to either skimp on other decks, like you could have your mono red hit and your Affinity hit, or you could have your mono red hit and your Terra hit, or you could have like Fringe deck hit plus your mono red hit. It like condensed that sideboard a lot.
My only thought on this sort of argument with the whole sideboard slots is I think the sideboard slot being full has been an argument long before Swift Spear was downshifted. Like the only difference was you had 4 Dust to Dust, 3 Revoke Existence in your sideboard. So
it was the opposite way around,
exactly,
wasn't it?
So I'm all for if red gets worse, you free up your sideboard slots. But the argument to make the mono red ban was it's polarizing the metagame and your sideboard slots are non-existent because they're all full up. But if mono red gets worse, your sideboard slots are still full. They're just on artifact hit and not red hit. In theory,
assuming Affinity grows or Letters grows to fill that gap.
Yeah. If the assumption that basically they're saying that if mono red takes a down tick, Affinity or Glitters decks make a rise, like that assumption, then you still got that problem. The only difference is the polarizing and the sideboard slots goes to Affinity. Yeah. So that's my only argument to that is like ultimately you're talking about the bannons, but you're giving the same reason as why it was just odd. But yeah.
And then moving on from there, they spoke about Terra. The first part being that they considered banning Terra and or Serpent, which to me was pretty interesting. Like I'd never ever considered Cryptic Serpent to be ban-worthy.
Yeah,
like,
I find that weird.
It feels like the perfect rate card for Pauper for the power level. So that was my main thought on that.
Yeah, Serpents are odd. Like, Terra's a 1-mana 5/5 with pseudo hexproof for obviously in the early turns, like the turns they're playing it. Like, Serpent is by all means, like, I'd say a reasonable card. If my blue-black Terra opponent played Serpent and Gurmagangle and Falaji, like basically old blue-black Terra, but without Terra and had Serpent in, like, I'd be totally fine with that. I wouldn't be, oh my god, turn 3, here's a 6/5 and a Gurmagangler. Like, I would not be upset about that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's obviously it doesn't have that removal protection and it's slower because you need the double pip to cast it. Obviously, it takes less instants and sorceries in the graveyard, but not really because you're just paying 2 mana, so you can't play 2 on turn 3. So yeah, I sort of get the consideration to ban Terra, but I think the thought to ban Serpent or even to consider Serpent is probably a bit misguided.
Yeah, it seems very odd to me.
The second part, they considered banning a spell from that deck. The main candidate being Lorien Revealed, which again I think is probably a reasonable card to consider banning.
Yeah, it is a reasonable one, but I don't know. I'm really weird on this one. I don't know why. Like, the card's very powerful, but it's odd. Like, I don't know.
I think it's sort of only really a banning or considering banning power level in this deck. The fact that it gets played in like mid-range control decks that don't play Terra or Serpent or even Angler, it seems a lot more like a fine card there.
Yeah, the card seems, it's definitely powerful, don't get me wrong, but it's like, it's powerful in like my eyes of like Brainstorm powerful. It's like a very good card, but it's not overly broken. Do you know what I mean? It's just a good synergistic value engine, whatever you want to call it. It's just a good card, and to no one's surprise, it sees a lot of play. But I wouldn't. seems like an odd thing because the deck existed beforehand as well, and it'll continue to exist after. So like, I
Yeah.
guess that's the only reason I can kind of consider banning it. I guess.
I think
But,
I guess it's sort of the least replaceable spell really that Terra plays. Like, if you ban Thought Scour, you just like put Considers in or something, or if you
yeah.
ban Mental Note, you just put like Considers in. Like, there's sort of nothing. You would have to ban multiple other cards
Yeah.
to have a similar effect to banning Lorien, I would guess.
Yeah, but then you go back around to the thing of basically just
Yeah.
ban Terra. Like, you know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
If you ban a multiple, just ban Terra.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, basically they finished on the Terra section by saying that it's basically its win rate is lower than Affinity and of Mono Red, and it has a lot more polarizing matchups, specifically Colgate. And then adding on to this, Tithe and Blade has just been printed, which is a really strong tool against Terra.
Yeah, I do think this is like it is a valid point that I'm not surprised the win rate is low, but then then again it kind of touches on, I guess we touch on the conclusion bit with the decks with the win rates. But yeah, I'm not surprised that it's got like it's a very polarizing deck.
Yeah.
Like I am not. It loses to itself. It loses to the right timed, graveyard hit or interaction piece or whatever. Like I'm not like I wouldn't be surprised by that. But obviously,
No.
it's the same as Mono Red. The highs are highs, the lows are lows.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Yeah, I did like that they mentioned Tithe and Blade.
Yeah, I did as well.
Because it's obviously clear that they are very much looking at what's coming out and what's slowly picking up in Portba.
Yeah.
I think Tithe and Blade obviously is a ridiculously strong common, and as we'll see in the challenges, will come up quite a lot in a lot of different decks.
Yeah.
And then from that, we got a bit of a conclusion. The first point they made was that they'll prefer to make a small change and then come back in a couple of months to make more changes if needed, which is something you've already touched on above.
Yeah.
The second point was that Control currently boasts some of the higher win percentages. Again, we've seen this in the challenges of Control growing in representation and of performance, driven by the sheer amount of decks like Mono Red that it's got good matchups against.
Yeah, this one is this is the section of the video where they talked about like the 53% win rate for Colgate and the 54% win rate of White Weenie or whatever it was.
Yeah. And Familiars is the highest win rate or something like that, yeah.
And the thing that the only thing that I had against this bit, which I'm all fine for, but they didn't acknowledge, was like these decks obviously have a good win rate because most of these decks will have 6 to 8 sideboard cards for red, and do you know what I mean? And like this is why they do well, but they then don't touch on that. Like if you got mono red out of the situation, it's not like all of a sudden necessarily Colgate becomes the best deck or whatever, because Colgate might struggle against the new other decks that come into the field. So like if everything's familiars, like Colgate will struggle. So then the win rate like they didn't. It really annoyed me that they didn't acknowledge that was the reason. And it's like, this is the whole point of a meta game. Like this deck is good because it's really good against X. Like make that clear. Like it just felt like, oh, it's alright. White Weenie's got a better win rate than Terra, so we're not gonna touch it. It's like that is not the case at all.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point.
I mean, like nobody's bringing in serrated arrows in the sideboard for the White Weenie decks, but just that was my that was my biggest gripe of the whole video.
I feel like serrated arrows isn't even
good
against White Weenie.
Obviously, that whatever.
I sort of get your point. Yeah, it's a fair one. It's a fair one.
But yeah, that was it.
The next couple of points that they brought up was one of the reasons for the lack of changes, like from the past 6 months or whatever since the ban Prism, was that the results have been very diverse. Again, as we've said above, and we've seen on a lot of these episodes, the challenges in particular are often really diverse. And a point that I sort of picked out that I thought was quite good was that they specifically waited until after the Brazilian Pauper Nationals to deploy the Swiftspear ban, so that they didn't like disrupt everyone's deck choices with 2 days to go or whatever it was.
I think which is obviously definitely good to do for them. Like
Yeah,
that obviously they have that ability, and obviously, I think Pauper's so small in the sense like in big paper events, like you could probably count them on one hand how many big
yeah,
paper events there is. Like having basically one member cherry picked all across the world that they can literally be like, oh, please wait for this because
yeah,
like Weber will have just said, look, Pop Brazilian Nationals is this day. Can we do it after that? Even
yeah.
if we've decided 2 weeks before, like we're gonna ban Swiftspear, it's definitely a good thing being able to do that.
And then the final few points, they chose not to unban Prophetic Prism this time, but it may happen in the future. Essentially, as we've touched on, they'd rather make a small change and then come back and see what's happening. One I thought was particularly interesting is that they said they think they could and should ban more aggressively, which I guess is sort of a reply to the fact that Swiftspear has been called for being banned for a long time.
Yeah, and I think it kind of, to me, what this shows is obviously you've essentially like the best way I can describe this is you've like X factored a group of people together. Like One Direction that pushed them together in X Factor. It's kind of what they've done here. They've just shoved a bunch of people together with completely different opinions on the format that they play and obviously adore. Like I actually think this shows that they're still working through some stuff. Like you'll definitely, from their perspective, you'll definitely have one person say, no, Swiftspear doesn't need banned, the data shows it doesn't need banned. But then someone will say, well, we're dying turn 3, this is miserable. Like you're gonna get a lot of this conflict and thing, and it kind of like, to me, it shows the kind of finding the feet, and I don't know, maybe Gavin's sitting them all down and be like, you listen 1 point, whatever. You know what I mean? Like it shows that they're finding the feet, and they're also like they're finally getting where they want to be, and this is kind of like, to me, I see this is their accepting, like, look, we'll fix the format when we deem necessary and not fight over it.
Yeah. It definitely comes across like they're developing a bit as a single entity rather than X different people.
Yes.
Another one that I liked was that they said that the Sticker Goblin was being watched to make sure it's not a big issue or it doesn't become a big disconnect between formats. Obviously, it is a disconnect between formats. Like you can't really question that, but assuming it doesn't become any bigger, or if it does become bigger, it will probably get banned.
Yeah, I think I'd say the problem for me is if that, like, in terms of like their opinion to ban it, to me comes if the red deck of choice now with the Swiftspear ban is sticker. That's when the problem is, because they're just two different things. So you just won't see it as much online, like on paper, as you will online.
I think that does have a good sort of run at becoming the red deck as well, which is quite worrying. As we've said, because given the impulse cards didn't get banned, then the sticker is the best place for those. But yeah, we'll see. And then the final point that I pulled out was that they said that they like to be transparent with their choices and discussion and decisions, which, if anyone's watched the video, comes across very well.
Definitely. It was a good all-round video, to be honest.
It was really good.
It was a good watch, and it just shows that that Pauper is leagues ahead of every other format in terms of bannings and communication.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's it. That was the breakdown of the video.
So obviously this episode has been quite deep. We're about 40 minutes in roughly. So we are going to touch on the challenges
rapidly,
pretty quickly, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you want to dive into Saturday.
Yeah, Saturday, 2nd of December. First place was a shock to me because we've not seen it in a while, but it was Bogles. Second place was Cold Author Red. Third and fourth was Jeskai Glitters and another Cold Author Red. And then 5th through 8th was 3 more Cold Author Reds and a Blue Black Terror. And then the two near misses, ninth was Colgate and 10th was Boros Initiative, making an appearance once again.
Was it stock
Um,
Boros Initiative? I'm assuming. Was it like
I didn't look into that much detail. I'll let you look at that while I
yeah?
continue on this. Bogles obviously getting a win is great to see. I think the interesting thing I saw with it is that it cut all the glitters to 2. Still had the 4 ethereal hammers and 4 masks. And it was also the ledge walker one rather than the toadstool bogles. But yeah, a pretty big shake up for bogles. Basically, since glitters come out, they all just jammed 4 in. But maybe 4 is just too many. And then my other point is that it's obviously just a massive challenge for Kuldotha. It's obviously pre-Swifty ban, so maybe a last hurrah, but yeah, it's very dominant there.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah, no other comment on. I can't believe that many red decks actually top 8. To be fair, and it was kind of perfect, as you say, like pre-Swifty ban, and like
Yeah,
you got Monday it was banned. It's like it doesn't show it's justified, but it kind of shows it's justified, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
But yeah, and also as you mentioned, the glitters deck, the Popageddon list, Jeskai
Yeah.
glitters making it in. It looks like it was it was definitely the exact 60. I don't know if it was the exact 75. It did kind of look like it. Yes, it is, because it has all the 2-mana white mana dudes.
But yeah, sort of coming back off that fantastic performance at Pop again. Jeskai Glitters is obviously the sort of one that didn't really show up that much. It sort of was a bit apparent at the start and then just completely died off to Esper and Blue White, and then Esper died off, so it was just Blue White. But it's nice to see it coming back.
Yeah, definitely. I also really like this take on Jeskai as well. It's like basically Blue White, but with Glinthawks, and then
Yeah,
I
with Galblast.
yeah, I just really like the challenging the synth builds with only one core Skyfish as well. Like most people most things I've seen is as soon as you put synth in, you literally put 4/4 Glinthawk Skyfish, which is like I just really like that challenge of like the norms.
Yeah.
But definitely a sweet deck. But hopefully we won't see any more challenges with 5 Kuldotha red in the top 8.
Yeah, in the top 8.
Would you like to move on to Sunday, the more interesting challenge?
Yeah. So Sunday the 3rd. It was a lot more diverse, surprisingly enough. First place was I've put blue black ish terror. We'll touch on that. Second place was Campfire Gardens. Third and fourth were 2 glitters decks, 1 blue white, 1 Jeskai. And then 5th through 8th was a white black blade deck, a blue black Fae, a Grixis Affinity, and a singleton copy of Kuldotha Red. And then the 2 near misses. 9th was Turbo Fog.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Somehow.
Told you it was good.
And 10th was Grixis Affinity again.
Where do you want to start?
Obviously, a lot more diverse than the Saturday challenge. I suppose the first deck that I thought was quite interesting was the blue black ish terror. I say ish because it ran no Gurmag anglers, but it wasn't like fair. It was blue black terror for all intents and purposes, but with no Gurmags, and instead it had 2 Murmur Mystics and 2 Thorns.
So I look at this. I challenge the flip it on its head a little bit. I see this as the blue black Murmur Mystic deck with Dark Rituals in, but then they've cut the Dark Rituals and added Terror, because there's no there's no self mill in the Terror. It's more like a blue black control deck with Terror as a win con.
Yeah, that's fair. Obviously, you got the 4 Lorians, but yeah. Apart from that, you just sort of and like brainstorms and preordens and ponders
and just kill spells and counters and all that usually stuff. So that's probably the way I'll probably look at this, because even the mana base as well. Like you've got the 4 aquifers, either like a bog, a theater, 2 swamps. It just seems like the blue black mystic deck, but with a choice of terrors for some reason. Which
And only
obviously,
2 mystics.
yeah, and only 2 mystics and 2
Yeah.
thorns. But yeah, it's kind of like a weird sort of like, I guess, a hybrid, but not in the sense because you've got no like mental notes or what have you. It's an
Yeah.
interesting take, regardless. Um, having all
I
these different
guess,
kill spells and stuff.
yeah. I guess the other deck worth touching on in the top 8 is the White Black Blade list. If I can find it on here. Which was a sort of, I guess, what you would expect from that. It's sort of a bit of a white weenie creature package, but with Thorns and Goliath Paladins. And then just stacked on stuff like Lembas, Tithe Blade, a Singleton Omen of the Dead, for you to bounce with your Glinthawks and your core Skyfishers.
Yeah, I really like this deck. I think it's actually the pilot that 5-0'd in the league that I seen. He posted it on Twitter and I commented on it because this list was sweet. It's essentially, to me, it's like a black white ephemerate deck, but they've cut
Without Ephemerate.
they basically cut the ephemerates and they've went round like obviously the Tithe and Blade, Lembas, core Sky Fishery route.
Yeah.
It's pretty. It's a really sweet take on the deck as well. And
I think one interesting thing that I noticed was obviously you're running 4 Lembas, but then 4 Deadly Dispute, which is sort of a bit of a not downside to running Lembas, but obviously you'd rather be Deadly Dispute and Ica Wellsprings.
yeah,
Um,
I think the only thing, because I've noticed that in Tithe and Blade decks with like Deadly Dispute and such, that there's been a lot more Lembas in play than Wellsprings. And the only reason I can think of is basically you've got more fodder for your Deadly Disputes, so you want your artifact to do more.
Yeah, that's fair.
And
Obviously, Lembas is pretty good with like the Glinthawks and the Skyfishers.
And that's the only reason I can think. Like, obviously, in the terms of like the Skyfisher, the Wellspringy Lembas thing doesn't really matter too much. Like, you get scry and draw a card as opposed to just drawing a card. But then, if you're gonna Deadly Dispute your Tithe and Blades or whatever, because you've now got more fodder, like you want your Lembas to might as well just sit there and gain you some life if you need to, or well, gain some life as opposed to just sitting there.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I can think of because I'm the same as you. Like even like Gardens lists seem to run more Lembas than Wellsprings now, and that's the only thing I can think of is because I don't think on raw cards or raw with Deadly Dispute like Lembas is the card choice.
I think like you said that they're just abundance of fodder makes sense. Obviously, you've got your 4 removal spells can now be sacked to Deadly Dispute. You've also got 4 Framing Inspectors, like you can always just sack a Clue or the Inspector. So yeah, it's pretty cool, pretty sweet list.
The only other thing I was like it doesn't confuse me, but wonders is why Thorn over Palace Sentinels when you're Prismatic Strands deck? Is Thorn just that much better?
Yeah, true.
I'm gonna say I'm assuming the Death Touch obviously is much more important than a white creature, but you know I can imagine, you know, you've Prismatic Strand on 3, Thorned on 4, and then you're like, I can't flash this back. Like I feel like that'd be a very real scenario that might would turn up. But
or you maybe have to like hold back a guy rather than like if you've got a Glinthawk, if you just have the Sentinels, you can get the 2 damage in. Whereas if you don't, you maybe have to leave back the Glinthawk or something.
Yeah, but that's my only thing that I find not strange, but I would like to know the choice on that is like why not run the white creature, especially if you're running Strands. But I really do like this deck. This deck is really cool and kind of touches on what we touched on with at the start of last week's episode on about like challenging wise synth in the Mardu decks where you can just run black white anyways and then case in point.
And play Deadly Dispute. Are you wanting to touch on the 9th place deck?
Apart from thank you for the 9th place deck, for getting the hot take in. That's it. Like I do genuinely think that Turbo Fog's actually like reasonably positioned to be fair, but pre-ban. Like it is obviously there is awkward things where you have to weather instead of fogging and things like that. Like they're both very situation based with obviously like flare and pain things, but I do think most decks are killing with combat, which makes weather like Turbo Fog reasonable.
I guess my only comment on it, it was playing a card called Keep Watch, which I've never seen played before. And it's basically 2 and a blue instant, and you draw a card for each attacking creature. Which when everyone's attacking you with 6 goblins, it seems pretty good.
It's a pretty good one. I like this list completely. Like, there's even the one event. I like it. But
you want to move on to the shout outs?
Yeah, I think move on to the shout outs seems reasonable. I'm not gonna lie, I haven't checked anyone's names on the challenges, so Neon's getting a shout out this week. That side, but I guess we will shout out obviously the PFP for not finally, but giving us communication on the transparency and how well the video was done, and obviously banning Swifty, obviously just taking control of the format generally. Kudos for that. You are doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, I think particularly the level of openness from that video and obviously the article and that as well is just it's great. It's basically what the community wants from the panel that run the format essentially.
Yeah. It's the format of the people, and this openness is making it a people's format basically. It's good. And that's pretty much it for shout outs because I didn't want to check challenges.
Hot takes?
Yeah. Let's go. We've got more hot takes this week somehow.
Yeah, so from the hot take from last week, I've actually got a few that we can now scrub out. My first one was one we've had for a long time. I think maybe like since one of the first episodes. Was that Swift Spear will not be banned this year. And unfortunately we've failed. We had 4 weeks left and he would have been home free. But yeah, Swift Spear is gone, so that hot take has now gone.
Yep.
Another one I had pinned was that we will get an update from the PFP after Ixalan, but before the next set. We got that as well with the ban announcement. So a loss and a win in the same announcement. My actual one from last week was that the buff Mono Red received with Tomb Raider would cause gardens and core gate numbers to increase in an attempt to combat Mono Red. But I didn't really notice that, to be honest. I don't think that really happened.
No, I don't. I didn't notice it either. But also, you've got a higher showing of Mono Red, so maybe the Tomb Raiders just can power through the core gates and gardens or something. Who knows?
But that buff has now disappeared. Now that Thraben now that Swift Spear has gone.
Thraben ban next.
I know. White Weenie, it's got 54% win
rate. My first hot take was that Mardu will feature in the top 32 at least one of the challenges. I hit and miss, shockingly enough. We did get Black White, I guess it's the closest we're getting, but obviously
it's Mardu with no sin, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And my last one from last week was that Boros Initiative will cement itself as a mainstay deck, and it is again back for another week in the top 10 this time, I guess. But it's definitely getting there. It's definitely got a lot of backing behind it, and it very much seems like a real deck.
I actually think it'll cement itself even more with the hit to Mono Red as well. I think because the thing that I like about it is the hate that kind of hates on Mono Red, as you will, isn't really like direct hate like strands and like big static creatures and all that sort of stuff. Like they're just naturally good against red as opposed to, but I think they're also good against the rest of the field. So I think it'll just cement itself even more now.
And it's one of those decks that doesn't play 8 Hydroblast, so it has the sideboard cards for the other decks.
Yeah. Great point, to be fair. Solid deck. My last one is Turbo Fog will top 16, one of the next challenges. And as we've touched on, obviously I got that right. I'm like a fortune teller and a crystal ball.
I have no idea how.
Can I say? See, that must mean Mardu must be next week. I knew one of them was this week and one of them was next week. I just couldn't remember which one it was. So Mardu must be next week. That's what it is. Would you like to move on to hot takes for next week?
Yes. So my first one that was that, or is that Mono Red will still be represented in the top 8 of a challenge, but hopefully not to the extent we've just seen on Saturday.
You would like to
Yeah,
think so.
it's not dead. It's definitely received a nerf. Whether that'll be enough or the perfect amount or not or too little, we'll see.
Only time will tell. Mine's kind of, I think mine's fairly free to be fair, but with that being said, probably won't happen. But we'll continue to see the 8 blast / same level of hate that we see in the sideboards for red, as we did in the pre-ban.
I hope that doesn't come true.
I just honestly think it is.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of the FAMS players saying that they did try cutting down on the number of blasts they had, and they started losing red matchups without why they didn't have Swift Spearing, obviously, as well. So,
All right, okay.
so I would not be surprised if that was the case.
Yeah, worrying. My last one is that other non-Swift Spear aggro decks will have a bit of a resurgence. I think especially given the bit of a plug that White Weenie got from the PFP, and that they're not sort of outclassed with not being able to run Swift Spear or forced to be in run Swift Spear. I think it's probably a good time for other aggro.
I was gonna make a joke on like White Weenie, like you've got White Weenie, what more do you want? But obviously you already plugged that, so I guess Zoo's gonna make a comeback. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed. Fingers crossed. My last one is kind of similar to yours, with obviously the plug of White Weenie, with the plug of FAMS being the most like highest win rate deck of 56%. I think
the most winningest deck.
Most winniness. Yeah, that's a word and a phrase that I should use. That FAMS will make an appearance in next week's challenge in the top 10 of either of them. So that's
giving yourself a bit of leeway.
Give myself a bit of leeway. I like to say top 10. I don't know why. Top 8 feels like I'm really trying hard. I don't know. So would you like to add anything else?
No, I think that's it from me for this week.
And that is all from me. Thank you all for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please do not forget to share it with your friends, family, local pauper community, everyone at the Chester event. Don't forget to share it, even though Reese will be doing the same. But yeah, that is all from us at Casting Commons. Until next time, and don't forget to stay hydrated. Peace!
Bye.